Welcome to Never Again is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I'm Evelyn Marcus, and in addition to being a psychologist, I'm featured in the documentary about anti-Semitism, Never Again is Now. I am a Dutch Jew and the daughter of Holocaust survivors. In 2006, I immigrated to the United States because of the rising anti-Semitism in Europe.
I am Phyllis Nimbler-Miller, the founder of the free nonfiction Holocaust theater project, thinedgeofthewedge.com. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest of the United States. My grandparents had come to the US from this turn of the previous century from Latvia and Russia. Yet in 1970, my US Army officer husband and I found ourselves stationed in Munich, Germany, only 25 years after the end of World War II. And this experience changed our lives forever.
Katharina von Schnurbein was appointed as the first European Commission coordinator on combating anti-Semitism in December 2015 in Brussels. The European Commission is the highest executive body of the European Union. As coordinator, Katharina von Schnurbein acts as the contact point for Jewish communities and relevant organizations while contributing to the development of the European Commission's strategy to prevent anti-Semitism in Europe. She liaises with the member states, the European Parliament, civil society organizations, and academia, with a view to strengthening policy against anti-Semitism. Katharina, welcome to our show. We are extremely honored to have you on as our guest.
Evelyn, Phyllis, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today and to discuss the worrying issues of anti-Semitism and what we can do against it.
And just to tell our guests, you are coming to us from Brussels. That is correct, right?
Yes, exactly.
Although, as you told me earlier, you actually grew up we were born in the southern part of Germany, in Bavaria.
Exactly, in a very small town in the forest, basically.
In the Black Forest?
In the Bavarian forest.
Oh, okay. So you were appointed in 2015 as the first coordinator of the European Commission to combat anti-Semitism. What was the situation in Europe at that time that you started your position in terms of anti-Semitism and the policies against it?
Yes, in fact, we had seen at that point already for a few years worrying increase of anti-Semitic incidents, anti-Semitism being expressed more overtly, and even leading to lethal attacks on a Jewish school in 2012, on the Jewish Museum in Brussels in 2014, and then the Hyper Cacher in Paris in 2015 in January, shortly after the attack on Charlie Hebdo. And that was really a turning point, I believe, that the understanding that this is really a threat to all of us. And therefore, in October 2015, this position was created together with a coordinator on combating anti-Muslim hatred, because in the wake of all these Islamist attacks, also hatred against Muslims increased significantly.
And now, 6 years after your appointment, have anti-Semitism and the policies against it changed in the European Union?
We see a significant improvement with regards to the awareness of anti-Semitism. And one of our goals has been to make anti-Semitism visible. So to improve the reporting and recording of it, because we know from a survey that we did in 2018 that in general only 8 out of 10 Jews report even the most serious incidents that they encounter, which means that we have a very high level of underreporting. And we are slowly changing this in order to show how serious the situation really is, and therefore create also political action. This is one aspect. And then we see that in our work with the EU member states, the 27 member states, the awareness on political level has increased. So following my appointment on national level, a lot of appointments of special envoys have happened, which means there is an entry door, a contact point for the Jewish communities, but also a coordination possibility among the different actors on national level. So for example, you need to work together with the Ministry of Education, with the Ministry of Home Affairs for security, with the Ministry of Justice, with the police. So all of this needs to be coordinated in order to ensure that we really address this issue across the board. And there we see a lot of improvement. But I think what is lacking yet, and this has to do also with the general challenges of democracy being challenged and our values being challenged, the improvement with regards to the Jewish community needs to be stepped up, because for them still security remains an issue. And if you have to think about, is my child secure when going to school, yes or no every day, well, then you might at some stage consider whether you have a future in this country or this continent. And the aim of what we have done, and we have just now adopted a strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. So the second part is really important for us. I believe the aim of everything we do is really to ensure that Jews see a future for them and their children and grandchildren here in Europe.
Could you tell us a little bit about that strategy, which I have read about, but I think that it's really important. And I particularly was interested in your last sentence, in which you said that Jews see a future for their children and grandchildren in Europe, because I know that is an issue.
Yes, in fact, I think, like your grandparents, a lot of Jews left Europe because they didn't see a future at that time. And we know what happened afterwards with the Shoah. And I believe before this background, we know and we understand that there is a direct correlation. When Jews leave Europe, it's and I believe it's very important to understand that only if Jews thrive in Europe, Europe thrives itself. And we want to make sure that Jews in the diversity of the community, because very often it's, there are very few actually. There are 1.5 million nowadays in Europe. So many people don't know Jews. They have the feeling that they actually know very little about Jewish customs and history. And we want to make sure with this strategy, among many other things, that Jewish life in its diversity, in its religious diversity, in its secular diversity, political as well, the understanding of Israel, and also all the festivities becomes more visible across Europe, and therefore also in a way more normal and more part of our everyday life.
I think, Katharina, that and I must admit I missed a little part of what you said because of technical problems, but I think what you describe as the strategy may improve the security of Jews behind the fence of their synagogue or Jewish school, and it may improve certain prejudices against Jews by displaying more of Jewish life and fostering Jewish life. But will it also improve the security of Jews in the streets on their way to synagogue, for instance?
Yeah. No, I mean, this is, of course, a huge issue. It has to do also with the fact that we must make sure for all those coming to Europe that Jewish life is a normal part of our society, and that accepting Jewish life is a very important prerequisite to belong to European society. Yeah, and so part of our integration programs, for example, also geared towards explaining diversity, explaining equality, non-discrimination, and the diversity of society in Europe. And it's, you know, there is a way to go, but this is certainly one aspect. And then, of course, with regards to right-wing extremism, we've seen an increasing rise again as part, and in particular during COVID, this has increased as a general opposition towards elite, engaging in conspiracy myths, engaging also in the idea that the Jews created the coronavirus and now they're trying to make money with the vaccines or whatever. You know, these kind of things have significantly, while they started on the internet, taken to the streets and created a situation in which the situation for Jews is very difficult. I believe that there is a counter reaction to this, and this comes also from civil society. That's encouraging because I think you know, in the US you're much more used to having a very active civil society that stands up when there is injustice, because of the way the situation or the system works with regards to state intervention and so on. In Europe, we state intervention and also you know, is still a very important part, and sometimes then civil society is not as active. But this is what we have seen significant change in, is that civil society stands up against anti-Semitism, against other forms of hatred, and therefore also is much more active in pushing back. And in the end, I believe that, you know, when you push back anti-Semitism in your own circles, it's maybe the most painful, but it's also certainly the most efficient. When politicians, you know, push back among politicians and parents in school councils address an anti-Semitic remark, something like that. Yeah.
And in that respect, fostering Jewish life may also help activate the civil society, because they're more familiar with Jewish life.
Yes.
These days, Jews often experience criticism of Israel. It is debated whether this counts as anti-Semitism or not. The European Union government adopted a definition that considers certain types of Israel criticism as anti-Semitic. Not all criticism of Israel, but certain types are considered as anti-Semitic by the European Union's government. Is this definition widely implemented in European society, for instance, in academia, where anti-Israelism is rampant?
So for the European Commission, the benchmark definition is the definition by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which was adopted by unanimity by the Alliance by 31 governments at the time in 2016, and those who have joined in the meantime have also adopted it. And that definition has been used then after its adoption since 2017 by the European Commission. Part of that says, for example, that criticism of Israel like that leveled against any other country cannot be considered anti-Semitic. However, double standard with regards to Israel, demonizing Israel, and also holding the Jews responsible here, for example, in Europe, for what Israel is doing, is unacceptable and is anti-Semitic. Now, we have to have a very fine balance between freedom of speech and illegal expressions of anti-Semitism. We have in Europe hate speech law, which is very strict. And by the way, it includes Holocaust denial and trivialization, which is criminalized all across Europe, and of course needs to be enforced, by the way, including on the net. Yeah, it's not done sufficiently, and is one of our aims also as part of the strategy to ensure that there is prosecution of online haters and that illegal content gets taken down. But it is important to recognize that even if it is not illegal, it is still anti-Semitic. And do we want to have anti-Semitism in our society? No. So, so I think there is an important aspect again for civil society also to act when there are, according to this definition, anti-Semitic acts or speech, to go against it and to speak up. So we find this definition useful because it's very practical. It's victim-centered. According to the survey that we did in 2018 among 16,500 Jews in Europe, this definition reflects what the vast majority of European Jews perceives as anti-Semitic. And I think with every other form of discrimination or hatred, we always start at the victim's perception. And so also with regards to Israel-related anti-Semitism and the effect it has on Jews in Europe, this is what we did, and that's why we find this definition so useful.
And is it? I think it's a big step that the European Union Commission, did adopt this definition. But do you see a lot of it being implemented in civil society yet, or not yet in Europe?
So we see progress in the sense that on top of having it adopted within the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, now 18 out of the 27 EU governments have adopted it specifically with aim of saying where they want to use this. So for example, in training for their law enforcement, for their police, training for their teachers. And also we see that a lot of universities, parties, the Green Party adopted it recently in southern Germany, for example. So a lot of different entities are adopting it, saying, when we go against anti-Semitism, this is our reference. And in order to facilitate member states the use of this definition, we have come out in January this year with a handbook on the practical use of the IRA definition, where we, on the one side, identify incidents based on the definition and how this can be used, and on the other side, show best practices on how authorities, but also civil society, use the definition in going against these incidents. So, I mean, given that it is only 5 years old, I think there has been significant progress across the world. In fact, just recently, Australia adopted the definition. The American Organization of American States in Latin America adopted it. So it has definitely gained momentum. With regards to academia, I think there you have freedom of research. We think that also in academia, the IRA definition can be very useful, but if academia comes up with other definitions, that's of course within their freedom and within their remits.
But you see it already implemented in academia here and there as well.
Yes, no, in Europe, there are quite a few universities who have adopted it. And let's say more with regards to making sure that Jews feel safe, that Jews can express their opinion, that they can. We had discussions, for example, that Jewish students could not be on university councils unless they renounced Zionism. Yeah. But if Zionism is a part of your identity, and you still want to be on a university council, or you want to fight racism or whatever, this must be possible. Yes. So that's why universities, in order to say we accept the self-identification of a large number of Jews, not everybody. Again, there's of course a diversity there, but as an expression of this, they have been using the IRA definition.
That's great and to hear, and also very relevant at this moment in the United States, where students on campus suffer the same intolerance of their Zionist identity. Okay.
Even in the strategy that we just adopted, we say the very clear sentence that Jews must feel safe on campus and in schools. So it is important to recognize this, because words have power, and so if there are initiatives and discussions that stigmatize the Jews, the Jewish students for their own identity, then it is simply discrimination. Yeah.
Is there an incentive for academic institutions to adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism?
I think the incentive in Europe is to say we address all forms of anti-Semitism, so the traditional racist perception, conspiracy myths, religious anti-Semitism, and also certain forms of Israel-related anti-Semitism. Yeah. So I think it is that is important, and as I said already, the definition itself says that criticism of Israel like that leveled against any other country cannot be considered anti-Semitic. So there is a margin of appreciation, and that is important to recognize also within the academic debate. Another aspect that the definition says is that an act is illegal, anti-Semitic act is illegal when so defined by law. So it does not limit freedom of speech because the law doesn't change. Yeah, it's the understanding of we accept the fact that in Europe, because we have the figures now for Europe, a majority of Jews regards these aspects of Israel criticism as anti-Semitic, and therefore this is our starting point. And whether it is then illegal, yes or no, and so on, is for the courts to say.
I see. That's still in process. Okay, Phyllis?
Yes, Jew hatred is deeply rooted in the history of the European continent. In fact, we talked about COVID. I'm reading this book about Berlin, starting with hundreds of years ago, and I got to the part about one of the plagues. Yes, let's blame the Jews and kick them out of Berlin. So we are well aware of the history of Jew hatred in all of Europe, and including England. But now that Jew hatred culminated 75 years ago in the Holocaust, what actions does the EU undertake to make the Holocaust relevant to Europe's youth today?
So very clearly, also, again, part of the strategy is that the clear understanding that you cannot shape your future if you don't understand your past. And the Shoah was a defining moment for the creation of the European Union. In a way, the European Union was created on the ashes of the Holocaust, saying never again. Yeah, so in the 50s, and therefore, now that we are 3 generations after the Holocaust, we need to find new ways of how we remember and how we educate about the Holocaust, because the strongest form of learning about the Holocaust, I think, remains a testimony from a survivor. Yeah, if you've heard that once, and I've been in schools also, you can hear a needle drop when survivors tell their stories. But as they are soon no longer going to be with us, we need to see how we can still relate this first generation testimonies to children today. And there are many also, digital ways and so on of doing this, but also with regards to the second and third generation to involve them. I think this is very impressive and impactful when you have children of Holocaust survivors tell their own story, and also that of their parents. So one thing we want to do, and that concerns then European youth in general, is to create a network of young ambassadors on the Holocaust all across Europe. So students that want to organize Holocaust remembrance or an event on the Holocaust in their environment, in their university, in their school, in their youth club, can get support to do this. Next year will be the European Year of Youth, 2022, and as part of this, we focus specifically also on this aspect. There is another aspect to it, is that the Holocaust happened very locally. So of course it was orchestrated by the Nazis from Berlin, and the structure was built by the Nazis, but in the end it had to happen locally in order to find the Jews as the Nazis had planned. What we want to do is to show how local it was by creating a network of sites where the Holocaust happened. So not only the big concentration camps that we know of, but really houses where Jews were hidden, or deportation sites, killing sites, to make those much more visible and to show it happened actually around us. And if we a big aspect, and then of course with regards to education, curricula, and so on, to work with the member states and ensure that there is systematic learning. And by the way, not only about the Holocaust, but also about Jewish life throughout the centuries, and what it therefore means if anti-Semitism today increases again.
Could you say that a little more detailed? I know what you're talking about, and I want to praise Germany as having this year 1700 years of Jewish life in Germany. But it wasn't until talking to a non-Jewish German in Berlin in August 2016 that I realized what you just said. It's how Europe has suffered as a continent from not having its Jews. And you just said that, but I don't think that our audience really understands what that means and what it could mean for America if America doesn't protect its Jews. So if you would like to repeat that once more or go into it a little deeper.
Yes, no, I think, all across Europe, before the Second World War, we had about 9 million Jews. 6 million were killed in the Shoah, and that left an indelible stain on the way European society functioned, because the Jews had simply been part of it in very different ways. In Eastern Europe, certainly in a very different way than it was the case, for example, in Vienna or in Paris. And this contribution, in order to understand the abyss of the Holocaust, one needs to understand also the way this life was interwoven beforehand. And there are many good projects on, where school children go into local archives to look into what actually was there in terms of Jewish life, what happened to my neighbors, and how did it happen. So this contribution is very important to understand. And for example, there is an excellent museum, Polin Museum in Warsaw, which shows this rich contribution to to Poland throughout the centuries of Jewish life and the history of Polish Jews. And so when you understand that, I think then you also understand why it is so important to address any form of anti-Semitism today, because it started back then with words and it can start with words again. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think this is really the link.
Yes, absolutely. As someone who's a writer, I write about it all the time. It starts with words and then goes from there.
Yes.
So Evelyn, your turn.
Katharina, I am a daughter of Jewish Holocaust survivors, and I was born and raised in the Netherlands. In 2000, when I still lived there, anti-Semitism started to rise in the Netherlands. A Star of David was painted on my front door. Hamas, Jews to the gas was yelled in my street and in the soccer stadiums. A Dutch jihadi murdered a filmmaker around the corner of my home and wrote a letter saying the Jews are behind all evil, the Jews are behind evil government. Jew hatred rose not only in the Netherlands, it rose all over Europe. So I left in 2006 and resettled in the United States. Do you think there will be a moment in the coming 40 years? I can reveal that I'll be 100 years old then. Do you think there will be a moment in the coming 40 years I can return to my beloved Europe and enjoy my fundamental rights there?
Well, this is the aim of what we do, is that not only you will return, that make your children will Europe try. So the aim of the strategy is to eventually put an end to anti-Semitism. I know that it sounds very ambitious and I'm not unrealistic, but I once worked as a spokesperson for one of our commissioners, and he was responsible for employment, and he was constantly talking about we need 0% of unemployment. And once I challenged him and I said, you know, why do you always talk about 3%? And you don't aim, you will reach at least, you know, close to the top. And so this is, I think, our approach with regards to anti-Semitism. We want to put an end to it with all different kinds of means. Take care of the security of their Jewish communities. This is, by the way, used to seem to be a very European problem, but I think there are some issues with this by now also in the States, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And for as long as it's necessary, it's not for the communities. That's one important aspect. And then with regards to anti-Semitism and how it spreads, I think another huge challenge is anti-Semitism online. As I said already, we have hate speech laws that prohibit speech inciting to hatred and violence, or criminalize it, and including Holocaust denial. This needs to be enforced on the one side with the platforms who have to take it down, and with prosecution who have to take online haters to court. And then, of course, and this is one thing that we also want to do, we need capacity of NGOs, of experts that can detect also anti-Semitic online hate speech, and also, and that's maybe equally important, conspiracy myths and disinformation, because that does not necessarily have to be taken down. It can even be counterproductive to take it down, but there needs to be counter speech. And so, you know, all of this together, I think, is another important aspect, that in the long run, we make sure that our living rooms are not flooded with this kind of hate all the time, because we've got so used to the fact that if we want to use the net, we have to put up with a certain amount of hatred. And I think it is important to understand that this is not normal. So that's another important avenue. And then, of course, education, I already spoke about it a bit, and also research, because research, when it is about anti-Semitism, at the moment, we look a lot to the States. There is an excellent institute, for example, at Indiana University, where there is real expertise with regards to researching contemporary forms of anti-Semitism and also Jewish life. And so we want to create a research hub in Europe to make sure that we can actually research about European anti-Semitism and Jewish life in its diversity also here, and create this kind of expertise with the aim to have an impact on the policy making, to ensure that this can then be used also by those in government and in the institutions that have to create the policies. So these aspects, I think, all go to give, I've said before, so standing.
We can.
You mentioned University of Indiana, Günther Jikeli. He did important analysis, meta-analysis of all the research about influences on anti-Semitism in the Muslim population in Europe. And one of the findings was that the more practicing the religion, the more anti-Semitic. Is the European Union also working on, we have a lot of Muslim immigrants in Europe, and there is, among other things, also a cultural influence on the high anti-Semitism in that population. Is the European Union also trying to combat that aspect of anti-Semitism that so many Jews in Europe experience as an important factor?
And we are very clear that any form of anti-Semitism, no matter which form it takes and where it comes from, is seen as equally pernicious. The way it is addressed has to be tailored, I think, to the different groups, and also, let's say, the Muslim population in Europe is not monolithic. It very much depends of the background of the family, as you said, also of the way religion is understood. We see for organizations that have been in Europe for some time, there are Muslims against Muslims against anti-Semitism, for example, in Austria, very young organization with students that say we as part of our identity also go against anti-Semitism. So this all newcomers, I think it is important to show them that this idea of how we understand democracy, how we understand diversity in society, of which they benefit, because this is part of the reason probably why they came to Europe. Goes for all of our citizens and the people who live in Europe. And therefore it's important to dismantle certain prejudices. However, I don't want to give the impression that we have only imported anti-Semitism.
No.
Anti-Semitism for years, and three fingers are pointing back at us.
So as we're having some technical difficulties, I'm going to ask my last question, but also you might want to use it as a springboard for your last thoughts also. So since 2015, anti-Semitism is also rising in America. Do you see this as the same development as the development in Europe? And if so, is there something that we in America can learn from you in Europe in combat?
Well, I am not, yes, I would not think that we in Europe are necessarily the ones to give advice to the US. I think that we have over the past century, well, no, decades, I would say, work closely together also with the US administration, including on anti-Semitism, and the US administration has spoken up against anti-Semitism in Europe. And I think this, in the same way, needs to happen also within, in a way, the US. That's very important. But I think that the challenge is for us, and this is another important aspect of our strategy, to recognize that the fight against anti-Semitism is a global one, and that you need to join forces, which means between governments, but also between international organizations. I'm pleased to see that the UN has now adopted a High Representative on combating anti-Semitism. We work very closely also with the freedom of religion and belief representative at the UN. We work with the Council of Europe and the OSCE, because all these international organizations have an interest, and I think have a duty, to join forces. And we need to join forces, I believe, also with other countries and civil society. So one aspect for us as the EU is through our delegations to also reach out and to be more conscious of anti-Semitic incidents that are happening in our partner countries, and to address those and to report those. So we are more alert ourselves, and we want to see ourselves really at the forefront of addressing anti-Semitism globally. And in this respect, we work closely with the United States administration, and I believe, you know, our values there overlap a lot, and it is good to see the US as partners in this.
Thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. Really, I have learned as much as I read. Instead, I have learned so much just from this interview today. I can't tell you, I can't thank you enough. And I thank our listeners for listening also. And do check out Evelyn's documentary, Never Again Is Now. If you haven't seen it yet, you can see it for free. You can see it at joinneveragainisnow.com. You can learn more about my free nonfiction Holocaust play at thinedgeofthewedge.com. There's also a professional translation in German, paid for by a Heidelberg Gymnasium history teacher who wanted a new way to reach his students.
Excellent, good.
And whenever you can, I'm talking to our listeners now, without getting into physical danger, speak up against anti-Semitism and hate.